Hello, okay, in today's video I'm going to run through how I created this watercolour painting, and I've used 3 colours and I'm using a mix of wet and wet technique and a layering technique, and it's a fairly simple painting. I've done a similar one using different colours before. The colours that I'm using for this one are blue ultramarine and burnt sienna and indigo. I was quite keen to try out the mix of blue ultramarine and burnt sienna because it's not a mix that I use very often, but I know it's quite a popular combination. And the first colour I'm putting down is a neutral, which I've produced by mixing those 2 colours. And I'm just laying that down in the background, and then I'll be painting on top of that. And that's creating this sort of wet and wet effect at the top there. So that background mountain will have a sort of feathered look to it. Now, I think that doing a landscape like this, it's really quite simple, is a great way of trying out colour combinations. And if you're doing something similar, you could use the same colours or try out some different colours. And you can also vary the size and shapes of the mountains. Okay, so I created that darker blue by adding a bit of indigo into the blue ultramarine, and I'm going to do a reflection of that shape at the bottom, but I'm leaving a very crisp white line through the middle, and later on I'll be putting a bit of blue ultramarine on there, but I want to keep it looking like it's a reflection or something. And I think these kinds of contrasts in paintings can look really nice, so I quite like these blurred edges combined with this very sharp edge that I've got in the middle. And here I'm using my knife. I couldn't find my normal knife, so I found this kind of garden knife, which doesn't quite suit the aesthetic of this video. But if you use a knife like this when the paint's wet, then some of the pigment goes into the line and you get a darker line where you've made that mark. So I'm just building up the layers a little bit here, but I am still working wet and wet. And I'm doing the same here. I'm going to put another layer of mountains on the top, and it is still wet and wet, but it's getting a bit drier, so it's holding its shape a bit more. And I'm really trying to get quite a dark line in the middle. Well, a dark line of mountains above and below that white line. Again, this is another way to have contrast in your paintings by using different tones. So I'm just continuing to build up the layers there. And I do also take out my this sort of white square frame I've got, which I quite often use to crop paintings as I'm going along to see what they will look like when they're cropped. It just neatens up the edge and makes it easier to see what's going on. But as I build up these layers, I'm just going to put the music up for a little bit, and then I'll jump in again quite soon. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm adding in that blue ultramarine on top of that white strip. I'm not going to cover the whole thing because I want it to look partly as if the light is really sort of bouncing off the water there, just in front of those mountains. And by reserving that white and then putting the blue ultramarine on after, I'm really ensuring that that blue ultramarine is a very pure colour. Now, when I was making these mountains darker, I did actually accidentally get a bit of a splodge of the darker paint on that white strip, but as you can see I'm just lifting it off with my brush, so you can correct mistakes in watercolour by doing that. And I'm just building up the blue ultramarine there. I'm just making sure that, you know, that colour is as bright as it will be. Now I do have a version of this painting within my short course, which is called Minimalist Watercolour Landscapes and Beyond. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link in the description. That's a pre-recorded short course and it's go at your own pace. And like I said, the painting, I've got a version of this painting in that course, although I use slightly different colours. So this painting is starting to look finished really. I'm using my little frame there to check the composition, and I did just think it was looking a little bit flat, and so I decided to put a layer of this neutral colour on the top left, and it's all completely dry now, so I'm just going to get this layer, and this is wet on dry, but it's going over those layers, and I'm just being quite careful not to disturb the paint below. And as you can see, when that goes on top, it does create really quite a nice sort of dynamic look to the painting, and it's a really good way of practicing your layering technique as well as your wet and wet technique. Okay, so this painting is looking finished now, and I really hope you've enjoyed this demonstration, and if you've got any questions or comments then please put them in the section below this video. I'm just finishing this painting off very quickly in the background, and if you did like the video then please hit like, and if you haven't already please consider subscribing to my channel, and I hope to see you in the next one. Okay, thank you, bye.